we are, module 24. If you were a good student / weren't sick, you went to 24 modules, although I know some of you went to less because you skipped, slept in, etc., etc. But if that's the case, you have 24 hours, well, at the end of this module, 24 hours of notes that you've taken, plus an uncountable amount of lab hours, plus an uncountable amount of notes from practice rounds, plus an uncountable of notes from just working with instructors in off time and mentor sessions. That's a lot of notes. And before you all came to camp, I'm sure you all did something like read an article about how to improve at debate camp, or at least mapped out your goals or your game plan for while you're here at camp. You're like, I'm going to learn this. This is how I'm going to learn it here at camp. While I'm at camp, I'm going to take these modules that focus on X. Maybe when you were in the introductory session and Marshall told you to close your eyes and imagine something about camp. I forget exactly what he said. I wasn't really paying attention. You did something to prepare for camp. And that's good. It's good that you came in with a strategy. It's good that you came in to learn. It's good that you tried to accomplish something during camp. But the problem is that camp is step 2 out of 3 at best. Hey, what's your name? Okay. It's step 2 of 3 at best. If you search improvement at debate camp on Google, you're going to get about 20 results from policy camps to PF camps to LD camps, all telling you, here's how you maximize your time at camp. Plan it out ahead. Have a goal plan. Have a goal. Have a game plan, right? Do something at camp that will sort of maximize your ability to learn. But there's not a single article about how to improve at debate camp. There's not a single article that talks about retention strategies post-debate camp. And there's not a single article that really tells you how you're going to really make the most of all of the knowledge that you've taken in over the past 3 weeks. If you think about it, 3 weeks is a long time in your life, right? And there are a lot of problems that people face with retention strategies after debate camp. So what this module is going to be is a discussion about why it is hard to retain things after debate camp. We're going to talk about the science behind it. And we're going to move into sort of effective strategies that I've taken up by myself, gotten from academic research that Marshall made me read, and from an interview with a few of the staff members and how they retain their memories or their knowledge after debate camp. Most of the science that will be cited here is from this book called Make It Stick, The Science of Successful Learning by Brown et al. Marshall, thinking that he was cool, made me read the book while I was at NSDA Nationals this year. But you should also read the book. It's actually really cool. So here's the fact. Most people are really bad about retaining knowledge after debate camp. I'll start with my sort of personal anecdote. I attended in VBI 2013. Yes, that makes me pretty old. I went to a pretty crappy traditional lab here at VBI, but I went to some cool modules, and I took some really good notes on them. And I don't know half the things I took notes on right now, right? And a couple of years ago, about 2015 or 16, I decided to look back through all the notes that I'd taken over VBI 2013, and I was like, oh my goodness, I actually learned a lot. I didn't actually know what theory or topicality was when I went to Grapevine my senior year to debate at that one single bid tournament that I went to. I had no idea what it was. But then I looked at my notes, and I actually had this excellent module from Richard Schmickler all about theory and topicality that if I looked through the notes would have been incredibly helpful for not losing to Akil Gandra on a topicality debate, because I had no idea what topicality was. And as I looked through all of these pages of notes that I'd taken, 100+ pages of notes, I realized, wow, I am bad at retention. I'm bad at retaining all the memories and knowledge from debate camp. And if any of you have been to debate camp before, I think you all faced a sort of similar problem, where you're going to come back to debate camp, you're going to relearn basically the same things, like what offense defense is, what framework is, what some basic philosophy is, and you're going to be like, man, I feel like I've heard this before, but why am I relearning it now? And the fact is you're just bad at retaining knowledge. And it's not your fault. We're just all scientifically based, just scientifically bad at retaining knowledge. Here's why. Studies show that if you do not practice knowledge retention strategies, you're going to lose over 50% of what you learned within a week of camp ending. The only things that you're going to remember after a week of camp ending are the things that have been repeatedly drilled into you over and over and over again. So if you don't practice knowledge retention, you're going to leave camp with basically the understanding that offense and defense is a thing. You're going to leave camp with maybe like a little bit of the instructor's voice in your head saying like way more, give like actual crystallization. But you're not going to leave with all the in-depth knowledge that you wanted to leave with. If you went to a module about content knowledge, on the critique for instance, you're going to forget the vast majority of this, just statistically speaking. And maybe you're like, no, I'm really getting knowledge retention. But the fact is that studies of Harvard students all the way down to lowly high school students, show that you're just bad at retaining memories. There's just no way that you can possibly do so. Learning is a 3-step process, and most of us are really good at the first 2, but most of us are terrible at the last one. Learning is a 3-step process. The first part is initial encoding, which is where you take short-term memory and translate that into long-term memory. Most of us are okay at doing that. We've taken the knowledge that you've received from your module, and you've translated that into long-term memory. Most of you here can probably tell me what module you were at yesterday. You can probably tell me the basic ideas that that module said. For those of you that were unfortunate enough to be in my module yesterday, I hope you forget most of what I said. It was not a very good module. But for the rest of you, I'm sure you can remember what that module is about. You have done a decent job of translating your short-term memory of the last couple of minutes and encoding it or putting it into your long-term memory. We're all fine at that, right? Most of us are pretty good at consolidation, which is the second part of learning, where we take those memories and we try to reform them in our minds, where we reorganize and establish memory traces. We attempt to assign an actual meaning to memory. We attempt to make connections in our brain, right? We're okay at that. Because all of you sort of not only just know the facts of what the module told you, but you can kind of understand what those were about. But most of us are really bad at the act of retrieval, which is the third step of learning. Retrieval is just recalling this memory from long-term memory storage. And there's a uniquely important part about retrieval, other than just simply regurgitating information. Retrieval updates learning, enables you to apply it when you need it, right? This process of retrieval is part of a process called reconsolidation, which helps update memories with new information. How many of you had a moment where something just clicked for you finally in debate? Where you were just like, I finally get the difference between offense and defense. Or I finally get the difference between usual and GM. Or I finally get this critique. I finally get this theory argument. I finally get how this works. That is not accomplished through any of the initial encoding or consolidation process. That is only accomplished through the reconsolidation process, where you take old memories and make connections to the current memories that you have, where you can make the connections in your brain that form a more accurate picture of how things work. That is the only way that you can actually get it to click. And that happens through repeated retrieval, or constantly recalling the information that you've been taught. I guarantee you that the thing that you now have clicked is something that had to have been told to you many, 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 many times. Because before that, there's a mental block, something in the way that prevented you from just clicking with the concept. But the only way that it can click is if you put effort into your learning. So most people are bad at retaining knowledge in debate camp, so I have a story for why I'm bad at it. Studies show that you're bad at it, and that the scientific reason behind why you're bad at it is because learning is a 3-step process, and most of us are bad at the retrieval and reconsolidation process of learning. There's also a few other things. That most of us are bad at retaining knowledge post-debate camp because knowledge does not translate directly into application. You can know a lot about the Wilderson critique. You can know a lot about the capitalism critique, for those of you who are in the module right before this. But the process of applying it in a debate round is distinctly different from simply thinking, yeah, I went to a module on that at camp, now I've got it. Right? The process of being a good debater is to bridge the gap between knowledge and application. And that's the biggest issue after camp, right? Where you have all this theoretical knowledge floating around in your head. You're like, I really just get this ontology argument that Wilderson's making, but I don't know how to explain it in round. I don't know how to execute. I really get why conditionality is bad, but I just don't know how to execute it in a round. And that gap is mostly a process is a failure in your process of learning, right? And there are a few other problems, right? There's a problem of knowing too much. A lot of us leave camp with this idea that we've learned so much from camp, right? Like, if you think about how much you've learned the past 3 weeks, it's not difficult to tell yourself, yeah, I learned a lot. This was the most memorable and engaging and interesting and educational 3 weeks of my summer, right? And maybe your school year, because a lot of your classes probably suck. And it's really easy to think that. Hi, what's your name? Are you marked off on the attendance sheet somewhere else?
Yes.
Okay. And Arthur, you're here?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We have this problem of sort of thinking that we know too much, right? And what our brain does when we think that we know too much is just shed what we perceive to be excess information. A lot of this 3-week stuff is just going to immediately leave your head. Things that Marshall Thompson told you during Socrates hours will just leave your head if you don't assign it high priority in your mind, or if you don't actively learn and learn how to learn, right? And there's this problem with just keeping so much of this information in your head and never doing anything with it, never applying it, never writing it down, never really thinking about it at all, really. It just floats there in your head or in like the back end of a Word document somewhere buried deep in your computer. These are all problems with retaining knowledge at debate camp. And I think it's really important that you recognize and you think back to your previous camp experiences and think, wow, I forgot so much from camp. And we all know this even outside the context of camp, right? Just like think about your classes, like what classes you took last semester. I guarantee you forgot like 90% of what that class taught you. But unlike your classes in high school, debate camp is important and matters, and you should keep this information in your head. So the next part we're going to talk about is how do we retain knowledge at debate? Now this is the part where I'm going to more explicitly cite from this book called Making It Stick. Right? There are a few things that you need to do. But before we get there, all of what I'm going to tell you is relatively simplistic. I'm only going to really go in depth in the sense that I'm going to explain for you the scientific reasons for why you should do this. But even that might not convince you, because most of this is just work, right? It doesn't matter how much you try to absorb through osmosis. None of it is going to stick unless you work at it. And so I was asking a few staff members, like, hey, how did you keep up all of the memories that you have from debate camp, right? Yeah?
Hey, I'm sorry to interrupt. The VBI officer just texted me. Can you mark the office here?
Yes. What is your name?
Charles.
Okay. There is no shortcut to sort of memorization or to knowledge retention or to retrieval or to reconsolidation. It's just work. And so if the most important tip that you get away from the next couple of minutes of lecture is just you got to read over your notes, that is going to be it, right? That's really the big point. You just have to take the annoying time to sit down for a couple of hours and read your notes. There's no shortcut around it. But there are a few ways to make your review time more effective than you otherwise would by just sitting there and reading through your notes, because that's not really enough. The first thing that you need to do when you're reviewing the notes that you've taken from camp is to organize these notes in a relevant way. This doesn't mean that you organize them now. This means post-camp, you take the time to organize all of your notes. Why? Because it forces yourself to get familiar with the broad topics that you're going to review later on. If you organize your notes into separate files, or to a single document, it doesn't really matter. However you want to consolidate all of your notes, you need to reorganize them. Just like when you're reading through a card file, it makes sense to sort of read through all the taglines stuff and organize them into file headings first before you get into cutting a card file. It makes sense to reorganize all of your notes into either a single document or a set of documents that are clearly organized and labeled, because A, your camp organization is probably terrible in terms of your notes and you can't really find what you need, but B, because reading just the process of organization itself helps already signal to your brain that it is time to get prepared to read. The second thing is effortful retrieval. So this is back to the process of sort of reconsolidation. It's not about reading the notes again. Studies after studies show that if all you do before a test at school is read your notes, you will not pass that test. The statistics are pretty clear that you will have done no better than anyone who just does not read their notes, right? Because as it turns out, just reading the notes doesn't do anything. All you've done is presented your brain with sort of a basic trigger for them to recall information. But if you remove that trigger, your brain is unable to recall that information. You need to be effortful in your retrieval of information. This means you need to make it difficult. Try to recite your notes from memory, or try to reconstruct your entire note sheet by writing it down separately. Rewrite all of your notes in different words. Take all of your notes, do something with them. Make it harder to read. Change it to a different font. That actually works, right? Because if you change it to a weirder, harder to read font, your brain has to work harder to read the notes. You need to make the process of relearning your notes difficult for yourself. Making it easy means your brain does not try, means it does not reconsolidate the information in a meaningful way. If all you do is sleepily sit there and scroll through your notes at night, I guess it's better than doing nothing. But it's going to be a waste of your time. You should just watch TV instead if that's the case. If you're going to take the time to review your notes, it is better to spend 30 minutes of quality time going through the notes and making it very difficult for yourself to recall them by testing yourself over it and to make it effortful than it is to spend an hour just randomly scrolling through your notes. It's not going to work. You need to make it effortful. Third, you need to delay subsequent retrieval. What does this mean? It means that you should, as soon as you get back from camp, you should take 1 day off and get right back into it. You need to look through your notes again when you get back from camp. You're going to lose most of the memories immediately as soon as camp is over. And if you wait for too long, if you wait for a week, if you wait for 2 weeks, you're going to forget the vast majority of what you learned. And even though you might be able to look at the notes and use that as a trigger to recall the information you needed, you're going to forget a vast majority of the details. So you have to start this process of reconsolidation and retrieval as soon as you get back, home, which might be nerdy, but you've also spent a couple $1,000s to come to a 3-week debate camp, so get over it. But then subsequent retrieval, why do you need to delay that? Well, it's because spacing is key. After you do the initial process of retrieval, which is a few days after camp ends, wait a week, right, before you get back into the sort of testing yourself part. It is proven that people who space out their testing or their retrieval processes or their reconsolidation processes are just better at recalling information in the long term. So people who cram for tests do poorly on tests. And more importantly, they do poorly on tests after the test because they forget all the information as soon as they cram. You don't want to cram. What you want to do is space out your retrieval periods over the course of a couple of days. So every couple of days, go back, look at your notes. The next part is repeated retrieval. You need to be willing to review your notes like once a week for the entire first semester, right? Until it's really ingrained in what you're thinking. If you think that you're going to become a critique debater in this next season, you need to be reading through your critique notes once a week to really get it, right? Because only if you read it a bunch of times does it become really internalized. Otherwise, it's just floating knowledge that is not connected to previous knowledge. It hasn't been properly reconsolidated. Right? So you need to repeatedly retrieve this information. Cramming it in all at the beginning, as soon as you leave camp and you just cram your notes into your head again, that's not effective. You need to, over the next couple of weeks or months, maybe even a year, you need to constantly be retrieving your notes. Finally, you need to beware the familiarity trap. This is the feeling that you know something enough that you don't need to study it anymore. And it's a problem that plagues many debaters who come to camp and think, yeah, I don't need to learn the basics again. And maybe some of you don't. Maybe some of you really get all the basics again. But there's a reason for why the most common complaints from circuit judges on the circuit is you didn't do this very basic thing. Right? You weren't clear in your spreading. You didn't weigh. You made this horrible strategic error. You just forgot to answer a perm. You forgot what an offensive argument was and made a defensive argument instead. The reason the most common criticisms on the circuit are basic things is because that is the thing that you actually need to study the most. Because you think you don't need to study it the most. You're like, I'm really familiar with the distinction between offense and defense. And maybe it has clicked for you, but there's a good chance that it really hasn't. And you need to be aware of the familiarity trap and be willing to go into the process of relearning basic annoying things. The most commonly missed questions on tests in colleges are not just the ones that are really, really, really difficult, but they're the ones where people are like, I got this, and then everyone misses the problem. And this is going to be the same problem for debaters. You need to be aware that even though you might consider yourself an expert on something, it cannot hurt, and it can only help to review those notes as well. What is all of this saying? Well, just like you would study effectively for a class, especially when you get into college, you need to study especially effectively for debate. Debate is basically is actually harder than any college class that I've taken so far. Although, in fairness, I go to the University of Oklahoma, so that doesn't really say that much. But this is difficult. And to memorize all the things the debate talks about, from complicated philosophy to current events to politics to the complex interactions of theory and all those weird things that come along with it, it's difficult to recall. And you need to be willing to put in the effort to recall all this information, to retrieve it and to reconsolidate it frequently. The next part about how do we retain knowledge at debate camp is use your notes as building blocks. Camp isn't over once camp ends. A lot of people leave camp and they're just like, through pure osmosis, I have absorbed all of the relevant information I need to leave camp and be successful. Or people will be like, yeah, I was just around some of the smartest debate minds in the country for 3 weeks. I paid thousands of dollars. That's basically the same as having the information in my head. It's not. Camp is not the end of your research process. It's not the end of your career. It's not the end of anything. It is merely the beginning. It is the building blocks from which something forms. And there is not a single module here that is claimed ever in history to be the end-all be-all of that particular subject. If you all went to the Black Nihilism module led by Vida and Carlos, I think they were very clear, despite the fact that it was an intensive 2-day process which involved readings, that it was merely the beginning of your understanding of the of the Warren K, right, or the Black Nihilism critique. If you went to the module on, I don't know, the politics TA, I forget if that module is actually done. If you went to that module, right, that is merely the building blocks by which you begin to get better at debate. All of your notes are building blocks. You cannot treat them as isolated pieces of information that if you absorb, you are done. You got this information. You're like, I did repeated retrieval. I did effortful retrieval on my notes. I read through them. I'm a good, diligent student. That's not enough. You need to use these as building blocks. So what do I mean? John Sutton, one of our staff members here, went to NSD as a student and forgot to look at his notes after camp. And a few years later, he was like, wow, this was a terrible mistake. Why did I do this? And he goes back through his notes, finds this, this note section by Tom Evnen on the unity of action AF or something like that. And these notes are pretty cool. Like, Tom Evnen's a really smart dude, and he knows what's going on. But these notes are not enough to just write an AF. Instead, this was the building blocks by which John used to begin his process of researching more in depth about this affirmative case, right? And use these notes as a springboard to launch himself into the world of academic research. You can't use your notes as just the Bible of debate. Your notes are not that. Your notes are the prelude to research. They are entirely different from it. So you need to use your notes as building blocks and not treat them as isolated pieces of information that if you consolidate in your brain, you're done and you're good. Use your notes as research starting points. Use them to launch not only into research of philosophical and critical positions, use them as positions to question yourself, right? The effortful retrieval isn't just testing yourself and seeing if it's good. It's forcing yourself to think in different ways about the knowledge that you have. How does your knowledge from this critique module that you took apply to your knowledge of a disadvantage, right? How does this theoretical issue in one area affect a theoretical issue in another? How does your research of this philosophy MC interact with this criticism that might be read? All of these should be building blocks for questions that you ask yourself later on. Not just research, but to really think hard and deep about debate, right? To really think about it. A lot of people treat debate as a bunch of isolated categories of arguments. Like, there's the critical arguments, there's theoretical arguments, there's philosophy arguments, there's policy arguments, there's stock arguments, et cetera, et cetera. No, there's unique interactions between all of these, and your notes should attempt to bridge those gaps, right? And to be the starting point from which you question all of debate. The next part is quizzing yourself. You need to quiz yourself on your knowledge, right? Even if this is just a simple, like, build a Kahoot for yourself or whatever, I don't care. You need to quiz yourself. The process of testing is the most effective way to retain information. Studies are very, very clear about this. Students who self-test before taking an actual test perform nearly 25% better than their peers who do not self-test before taking a test. There's a reason for why the most effective thing you can do before a calculus quiz is to take the calculus quiz before you actually take your calculus quiz, right? It's just a self-test. And self-testing in debate is a little bit difficult because there's very few knowledge points that are just straight up facts, right? Like, insert math equation here. But you can test yourself on basic things, right? Like, go online, find some examples. Make yourself apply this knowledge in an interesting way. Go through, for example, a CNN news source. Write out every premise that this article has. Find every logical fallacy that it has. Point out all the internal links and map it out. Do something with it. Find something to criticize in it. Think, why does this line form an excellent link to the critique that I want to read? You have to quiz yourself, not just in the sense of here's this knowledge, where's the multiple choice answer for it, but quiz yourself in the sense of how do I apply this knowledge that I've taken from my modules into actual, the real world, right? You need to be willing to do that. The next part is drill. I think this is the single most effective thing you can do after camp. Drilling is the application of knowledge in the abstract to something concrete that you can utilize in a debate round. There's a lot of drills out there. If you want, I can go into a long tirade of all of the drills that exist, but I'll mention just a few. I think drills, for example, the Hell 1AR are one of the most effective drills that debate has to offer, where you have a friend give you a 13-minute 1NC and you get 4 minutes to respond, or if they're really mean to you, you get 3 minutes to respond to a 13-minute 1NC and see how well you fare. This takes all the knowledge you've gained in the abstract and makes it really relevant to how you apply it in debate rounds. As I said, one of the biggest problems with camp is this disconnect between knowledge and application. And I think we see it here while we're at camp, where debaters post the round can better describe the argument that they were going for than they went in the round, right? Where after the round they're just really capable of explaining this critique they went for, but in the round are just unable to technically execute well. I think it happens a lot. Judges see this all the time, and I think you know it too, where you have this feeling in yourself where you're like, I could have done that better. And it's because of this gap between knowledge and application. And people, I think, especially here at camp, really too often think, I have the knowledge, therefore the application must follow. But no, the gap between the knowledge and the application is a much bigger gap between the gap between knowledge and nothing, right? It's so easy to tell someone about Wilderson. It's so easy to tell someone about how the state's counterpoint works. It's so easy to tell them that. In fact, Marshall once proclaimed, and by once I mean like 3 days ago, proclaimed he could get anyone to the TOC by just giving him his prep, and all they had to do is read it. They could be a reader monkey, and they could get to the TOC. This is not an effective way of teaching, certainly, and nor is it a valuable form of coaching, but it's true. But to really get someone to execute themselves, to get the knowledge from the brain out as words from their mouth into like the knowledge or into like the head of the judge, that's the hardest disconnect. So you just have to drill, right? You have to be able to apply this knowledge, and you need to be drilled constantly. The person who won the TOC this year did nothing but drill, which I've got to say is not like the best strategy in my mind. Like there's other things you need to do, but I think it proves that if you just drill a lot, you're going to finally bridge that gap between knowledge and application.
Are there any other drills you suggest?
Yeah, a bunch. Ask me after the rest of this module, and I will go on a tirade. But basically, if you need drills, go to Drillin' Like a Villain by Danny Dubois on VBriefly, probably the best article on drills that is currently available.
Drill like a villain?
Drillin' Like a Villain. And it's like drillin', but there's no G and like an apostrophe there, because Danny thinks he's cool. Excellent article on how to drill. Yeah. So yeah, I kind of just want to like rant about drills being really important for a little while longer, but I won't. All you need to know is please drill. After camp, if you don't drill, all of this, even if you retain the knowledge, the ability to apply it in round is just gone. The final thing is to watch rounds. There's literally an uncountable amount of hours at this point of LD and policy debate rounds online. I think you should watch both, especially if you plan on competing on the national circuit. There's not a good excuse to not watch policy rounds given the trends of Lincoln-Douglas debate towards college policy. If you are at all interested in national circuit success, please watch policy rounds. Policy rounds are just more complicated, in-depth, and slightly weirder LD rounds. They contain stranger arguments, they contain more developed arguments, and they contain a lot less theory. So if you're into that, that's cool for you. And they're performed by people who are so much more like intelligent and so much more experienced than the vast majority of LD debaters, because the best LD debaters go into college policy when they're done with debate. Watch a lot of college policy rounds. For example, we have on staff here Devon Murphy, who won the NDT and CETA, which if you don't know is a really, really big deal. If you want to watch him debate, he's actually literally, not just by record-wise, but in terms of technical execution, probably one of the best 10 debaters in the last decade. He's up there with the likes of people who've won the NDT twice. He is very, very good. You want to know how to get good at technical debate, technical critique debate, watch Devon. You want to know how to get good at like straight up policy debate, you can watch like Himant Sanji from Harvard, or you can watch like Alex Miles from Northwestern. But find policy rounds to watch. Find LD rounds to watch. And it's not just watching the rounds. There's, I think, a lot of things that you need to do when you're watching a round, other than just putting it on in the background and listening to it. First is you need to use your notes to point out everything that happened in round. When something happens in round, you need to be able to say, yeah, this directly relates to this part of my notes that I took. Connecting the notes that you took in the abstract to concrete applications of it in round, especially by other people who are more technically experienced than you, is an effective way to make these notes mean more to you. These notes don't mean that much to you in the abstract if you can't exactly point out how it's applied in round. It's like when in a math example, people are just like, here's this formula, and you're like, I have no idea what this is, until the teacher finally writes it on the board for you and like makes it understandable and clear for you. I think that's sort of how notes are in debate, where it's just like this abstract formula that you don't know how to apply. And the only way to know how it's applied is to watch other people apply it. So you need to be able to say, pull out your notes list from the disad module or something like that, and say like, this is the structure of a DA, here's the uniqueness, here's the link, here's the internal link, here's the impact, right? And point out every function of the card. You need to be able to do that, right? You need to be able to understand every function of the responses that the AF makes to those DAs, right? Like this is a internal link takeout, or this is a non-unique, or this is a uniqueness overwhelms the link press, or something like that. You need to be able to really identify everything in a debate round. You need to make decisions, right? None of this knowledge, or even application of this knowledge, is at all useful if you can't think like a judge. And post-debate camp, I think one of the problems is that we teach you too much to think like a debater, right? And you have to some degree, think like a debater to be a debater. But the problem is you're not convincing in any given debate round the other debater, and you're not convincing yourself. You're not convincing a debater, you're convincing a judge, most likely a former debater. But former debaters think differently than current debaters. And you really need to take this camp knowledge and think, how is this relevant from the perspective of a judge? And the only way to really make that possible is to make decisions. There's a lot of rounds out there currently with film decisions online. You should watch the round, make your own decision, write it out, 3 or 4 paragraphs long. Use the concepts that you took in your notes and modules. Use the concepts that your instructors talked about when they were critiquing your own rounds. Use those things. Write your own decision out. And then listen to the judge's RFD and think, how much am I thinking like a judge? Right? All of this knowledge from debate camp is useless if it is not applied in the context of a debate round and specifically applied to convince a judge. The more that you can think like a judge, the more that you can identify your weaknesses, the more that you can identify your strengths, the more that you can identify how to be a better debater. You're not going to win if you're just a good debater. You need to win by convincing judges that you're a good debater. And finally, when you watch rounds, you have to connect everything that you do back to something that you've learned. Even if it's something as simple as more advanced flowing techniques. Right? Connect everything that in that round back to something that you learned. And if you haven't learned about it, use that as a starting point to learn more, right? But the vast majority of topics that are covered in round, you have notes on, you have information on. These last 3 weeks, you've just, by pure osmosis, been around something, right? Someone who's talked about that subject. If it's an advanced critique round, how does this critique that they've read mirror the critique that your instructor has read to you in a drill? How does it mirror this thing that you learned in a lecture? How do these components or the same logic or the same thought processes apply, right? Connect everything back to something. The more connections that you make between your notes and other notes and rounds and other thought processes and research and books and etc., the more you get a holistic, complete picture of debate. The best debaters are not those who have isolated pockets of knowledge and they can randomly apply them in whatever context they need. The best debaters are the best with a whole, holistic vision of debate. They really understand how all of the parts of debate interact together. Right? I've not met a debater who has been successful, especially on the collegiate level, that doesn't have a strong understanding of how all of debate works. There are a lot of pretty successful policy teams that just don't understand how the critique works, and they just can't be that successful. They've capped out their limits because they don't have a holistic vision of how debate works. But people like Devon knows how all of debate works. If you ever ask him a question about anything in debate, holy crap, that man can answer anything that he wants. He has a very complete vision of how debate works. And those are the successful debaters. You have to be willing to take the time to draw connections from every note that you take, to every other note that you take, to every round that you watch, to everything that you hear, listen, think about in debate. Finally, is if none of this is possible, if this is asking too much, well, I have good news. There is a study that indicates that all you have to do, even if you don't execute all of this, is mentally think about it for a bunch, which is a cheap shortcut that exists. They actually asked a bunch of people to play basketball, and they split them into 2 groups. They asked one team to shoot free throws, the other team to just imagine that they were shooting free throws, and to really visualize the process of shooting free throws, like to really walk through, like if I were to shoot a free throw, what would my muscle movement be like and stuff. As it turns out, they performed approximately the same. Because if you really take the time to visualize and to really in-depth in your brain, think about the process that you're about to undergo, and pretend like you're executing it, you'll do fine. Top debaters have a reputation for like spreading in the shower. You don't have to do that, but if you spread in your head, it's also a similar shortcut to sort of getting good. Right? If you just, in your free time, while you're just traveling to and from school, think about debate, visualize debate, think about your notes, try to recall them, try to think about them. Think about rounds that you've watched, think about decisions that you've made in the past, think about why you might be wrong, argue with your own decisions in the past. As long as you think about debate, right? As long as you effortfully think about debate in your head, you can do fine. Is that my recommended strategy? No, please, actually do the things that I'm talking about. Like watch rounds, do drills, please go over your notes, please make a concentrated effort, right, to do well at debate. Because very few debaters have ever just done well without doing hard work. Right? Most of the people here who are going to do well at the camp tournament are drilling every night. Right? They are doing a lot of extra work. And to imagine that the process of learning after debate camp is any different than that is silly. It is going to take a lot of hard work. It is going to be annoying. right? And especially now that you don't have an instructor who just sit there and tell you all the things that you want to know, that you can't just go to Socrates hours and just be like, look, I'm just too lazy to read this book. Can you sum it up to me? If you don't, I know that you don't have that anymore. But after camp is the hardest learning step, and it's really the step that differentiates the average debater from the really good debater, right? The average debater leaves camp. They're like, I got it, I'm done. The great debater thinks this is just the beginning. There's a reason why people come back to camp every year. It's because they know that they haven't learned enough, that there's always something better that they can get better at, right? There's a reason why you can always improve in life and in debate. And part of that is because some people just don't memorize their stuff after the first session of camp, and they have to come back and relearn it all. So really, debate camp is just the beginning. The final part that we need to talk about is sort of how do we translate this into success? And the short answer is I don't know. There are people that unfortunately drill all the time, that read through all of their notes, that watch a bunch of rounds, that are really smart about debate, and they just don't have success. And that's a topic for a different module, right? I think the easiest solution to that is just fake it till you make it. But there's no way to take all of the stuff that I've talked about and translate this into success, right? Even if the module title is a little bit misleading about this. Nothing that I've done here is a guarantee for success. But it is, however, I think, the easiest way to put yourself on above footing of people smarter than you, people older than you, of people more experienced than you. It's an easy way to get a leg up over those people. It's not a one-to-one correlation with success. You won't do this and immediately bid, right? There's no way I can guarantee that. But this process of thinking more holistically about debate translates into competitive edges in debates. This process of having one more part of your notes memorized means that you might remember a trick from debate that your opponent does not remember from camp. You can actually debate people from your own lab during the season. It happens a lot, actually. And if you're the one that took the time to remember more about debate camp than they did, you're going to win most of those debates. There is not a one-to-one correlation with reading my notes and practicing effortful retrieval and doing well at tournaments. But there is a strong correlation with edging out opponents that are, might be slightly better than you in the abstract, but because you took the time to do a little bit more hard work, then you're going to win those debate rounds. So that's really it. In the end, the advice I have to say is hard work beats talent most of the time, the vast majority of the time. Yeah, sure, there's some people that did well this year. Some may be on staff who didn't have to do that much work relative to the rest of you. That's just how the world works. But most of the time, hard work beats talent. And you might think, well, why bother reading these camp notes? I already got these. Let's learn something else. Well, it's because it's a process of making all of the information that you've taken over the course of debate, whether from books you've read or from rounds that you've had or from camp itself, and synthesizing that into a database in your head of a single source of all of debate knowledge. The more that you understand the interaction between everything that has happened in debate and how it interacts with everything else, the better you are to holistically understand all of debate, the better you will be at translating that knowledge into application in rounds, the better you will be at understanding how arguments work and how your opponent's arguments work, the better you will be at debate in general. All of this matters, even if it doesn't matter that much to you, but it definitely matters to judges because they can tell the person who better understands debate as a whole. And so that's why I think this module is important. So with the remaining 5 minutes, if you have any questions about anything that I've talked about, that's what this will be for. If there are any questions, yeah.
Can you go over the different drills that we can do?
Yeah, so I'm just going to cheat and pull up the drill in like a villain article and highlight the ones that I think are really important. So everyone can do speaking drills and stuff, like spreading drills and whatnot. I don't think those are particularly worth going over, but everyone knows the variations where you put a pen in your mouth, where you put a word in between everything that you spread, or you spread everything backwards with a pen in your mouth and a word in between everything that you've said, which is fine. I think the most important drills are A, persuasion drills, and B, efficiency drills. So persuasion drills, I generally require a partner or you to record yourself while you're doing this. As I said, one of the biggest problems in debate is a lack of is this sort of disconnect between knowledge and application, and what you might perceive as something being explained well in debate round is probably not perceived by any judge or competitor the exact same way. So I think some of the better drills are just really taking the time to go for like an argument that is complicated, for instance, and explain that to a person that isn't you, or explain it to yourself in a voice recording and transcribe it, for instance, and think, is this persuasive to someone else? I think this is really important, especially if you're a critique or philosophy debater, that a lot of these concepts are just very difficult to, or just like very difficult to do. And so having a drill where you just sort of give speeches to yourself or to other people is really effective. The efficiency drill part is, I think, also incredibly important, especially in terms of getting better at technical debate. So I mentioned Hell 1ARs being the sort of most important one, where you like hit a 10 to 14 minute NC and have 4 minutes to cover it. If you can get good at the Hell 1AR, you're probably never going to lose an AF round again. If you just can answer a 14-minute 1NC, you're probably not going to lose to a 7-minute 1NC. Shortening 1ARs is really effective. This one is useful for post-round or post-tournament redos. Oh, one thing I forgot to mention in terms of improving knowledge at camp. Redo the rounds that you have at camp. I forgot this. Redo the rounds that you have at camp. You have the flows. You should have taken notes from the judge. Redo what they told you to do. Anyways, one of the ways that you can redo them is by shortening your 1AR. When you had a round here at camp and you got 4 minutes for the 1AR, give yourself 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Give yourself 3:25. Give yourself 3 minutes. See if you can get through everything. Because the more efficient you are, the better you're going to be at debate camp, or in actual debate tournaments. Danny also mentions this drill called compartmentalization, which is basically where you only focus on answering one section of a speech at a time. So for example, you allot yourself 1 minute to answer the NC with as many possible responses as you can. So like, they read the pragmatism NC. How many answers can I generate in 1 minute, and how efficient can I make them? I think I've heard like 6 to 8 before. It's pretty a lot of them. But yeah, just and any form of modified redos I think is really effective, especially post the camp. Taking all of the camp rounds that you have, you're going to have a camp tournament starting tomorrow, where you have, I think, 6 guaranteed rounds, if I remember correctly. That's 6 opportunities with a win and a loss, and very like in-depth judge feedback against an opponent that isn't in your lab, so you haven't had the practice of going against a bunch of times. That's an opportunity to do a redo. Think about how you would have done that 1AR differently. Think about how your notes say that you should have handled that 1NC. Think about how your module about this critique means that you could have executed this critique better in the debate round, right? And just modifying your redos a lot. Cool. Any other questions?
Thank you.
All right. You all are free to go.
Thank you.